What up? What up? What up? What up, y'all, man? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk, the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. This is the first SWAC Talk show of 2025. We had an episode of SWAC Smoke to be our first episode of anything that we did in 2025. This video was supposed to come out on New Year's Day, but New Year's Day life and all that pushed it back a little bit, so it's dropping now. Um, like first, before we even get started, man, I'd like to thank Coach Tremaine Jackson and the Prairie View A&M Athletic Department for helping put on that great show that we had last Thursday. If you haven't seen it, man, check it out. It was a lot of fun. Looking forward to keeping tabs on what Coach Jackson do out there on the hill with the Panthers. But this video is gonna be our Jackson State 2024 recap. Um, One thing about when I do these recaps, I do them for a couple reasons. One, I do them because I like to look back on how my predictions were in the preseason. And two, I just like to, kind of flesh out a little bit more of football, because I know a lot of people like football, so we like to flesh out a little bit of that. Um, and we got a few more of these coming. We got a live episode coming with Coach 67 TV Sports. Y'all make sure y'all check out his channel. He's SU guy, so we're gonna do an SU recap live. We still got Valley and Prairie View, TSU and Pine Bluff also coming. So y'all keep it locked for them. We're gonna sprinkle in our first basketball recap. Recapping Saturday's action. That video will drop tomorrow, which is Sunday. So we're gonna sprinkle in a lot of basketball here and there. We're still gonna have football because you got National Signing Day. You got transfer portal, additions. You got Valley still with a coaching search going on. You got, spring football coming. You got Legacy Bowl. You got the NFL draft. You got, schedule is going to be released in the next few weeks. So we got a lot of stuff still to cover with football. So football's still going to be here, but basketball going to be in the mix. And that's kind of how we stand in the next few months going forward. With that being said, man, y'all make sure y'all subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment your thoughts, and share. Hit the notification bell to be alerted to when videos drop on odd days like this one. So hit the socials, Twitter, which is SwagTalk76. That's where I'm kind of most active at. Also, don't forget to hit my Facebook and Instagram, which are both Swag Talk. And let's jump into this recap. One thing about doing these recaps, when you have a team that was great, it's really straightforward. There's not a lot of ifs and ands about what they could have did different. How they fell off A, B, C, or D. So there's not really a lot there to kind of have to look at and say well, if they did this, then this could have happened. So we don't really have to worry about that with this team. We just kind of straightforward talk about how they 2024 went. And that's what we're gonna do now. My prediction for JSU was 9-3. Obviously, I was wrong on that. Missed the overall record by one game, but I had them finishing 6-2 in conference, which I again was wrong. They went 8-0, so I missed out. I missed on their SWAC record by 2 games. I missed on the overall record by 1 game. Not bad, but obviously they exceeded all my expectations. When you look at how my predictions went compared to what they did this season, I had them losing to ULM, which they dropped that game 30-14, but that game was closer than what the score indicates. They had a lot of good opportunities in that game, but couldn't get over the hump. I had them beating Lane. They ended up beating Lane 58-7. I had them beating Southern. They beat Southern 33-15. I had them beating Grambling, but Grambling obviously upset them 40-21 in a game that JSU turned the ball over 5 times. Grambling had 2 defensive scores in that game and a few short fields, and they were able to stymie Jackson State and get the win there. I had them beating Texas Southern, which they did 43-14. I had them beating Alabama A&M, which they did 45-38 in a game the Bulldogs had to come from behind to make it close. I had them beating FAMU. FAMU went down to them 35-21 in a game that came down to the 4th quarter. I had them beating Bethune-Cookman. They led that game. They won that game 37-17 after that game was tied up at 17. That 20-point bludgeoning in the second half kind of just knocked Bethune out. Homecoming against Pine Bluff, I had them winning. They beat them 41-3. Valley, of course, I had them beating. They won that game 51-14. I had them losing to Bama State, and they beat Bama State 16-10. And I had them losing to Alcorn, and they thumped Alcorn 48-10. Then they went to the SWAC championship game and beat Southern 41-13. And they went to the Celebration Bowl and they basically destroyed South Carolina State 28-7. Um, and finished the season with a 12-2 record. Um, 8-0 in conference. Finished the season on a 10-game winning streak, went 6-0 at home, 4-2 on the road, 2-0 in neutral sites. So they had a really strong season. They did they did everything that you can ask out of a team. Um, Coach Taylor's second year the team got better. They weren't bad last year. They just had to rebuild, and they kind of got themselves on point. Um, some of the things that I had as my thoughts was, first off, this team returned a ton of guys in the running game. They at that point coming into the season, they returned their top six rushers. Some of those guys, kind of went down to injury. Um, I think Ahmad Miller played like 3 games. JD Morgan played like 4 games. So they had a few guys who didn't necessarily play as much as they did in previous seasons, and so that kind of took them down a little bit, but it did not affect their production at all. This team was a well, this team was a I think you can honestly say this was a team that was a run first team. Um, and they did it well. They ran the ball extremely well this season, and you really can't ask for a lot more than that. With the running game, they led the conference in rushing at 213 yards per game. They scored 33 touchdowns on the ground, which was by far the most of any team in the conference. They averaged 5.2 yards per carry. Again, that was tops in the league. They ran the ball 571 times. So, like I said, they were a team who was run heavy. Um, they ran the ball. They ran the ball a lot, and they were very, very efficient with it. They also were second in the league in total offense, averaging 403 yards per game, 6.4 yards per play. And just to kind of look at what they did in the run game, Herb Mulligan had a big season this year. Finished with 1,245 yards. Won the offensive player of the year in the SWAC, 6.1 yards per carry, 13 touchdowns. Um, on 205 carries, had a long of 54, averaged over 103 yards per game. So, he was by far the best player in the league offensively, and he got it done. Travis Terrell, young guy, had 459 yards on the season on 75 carries, averaged 6.1 yards per carry, had 4 touchdowns. Jacoby Morgan at quarterback chipped in 98 carries for 321 yards and 6 touchdowns. He averaged 3.3 yards per carry. And Mari Matthews played a lot, especially later in the season. Had 52 carries for 211 yards and 3 touchdowns. Had 4.1 yards per carry. Then you had a couple quarterbacks in there. Zion McDonald, who had a big championship game in the second half for JSU, 159 yards on the ground, averaged 10.6 yards per carry with 2 touchdowns. And Cameron McCoy had 163 yards on 24 carries with 6.8 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns. So as you can see, they had guys to just really take care of that run game, and they ran the ball extremely well, and that made it pretty easy for that offense to click. Because I feel like when you can run the ball, you can kind of dictate whatever you want. You open up so much more when you can run the ball. Because teams have to commit to that. And this team averaged 161 yards on the ground last season, so it wasn't like they were bad running the ball last year. They just ran it even better. Last season they ran the ball 397 times, so they still were a team that wanted to run the ball. They just were more efficient doing it this past season. And when you put up numbers like that, you're really gonna put yourself in a great position to win games, and that it helps you put up points. This team averaged 36 points per game. They scored 63 touchdowns on the season, had 510 points last season, when you look at what they did scoring wise, they averaged 27.3 points per game. So they went up almost 10 points per game on offense, which is definitely a big jump for them. Um, like the total offense, like I said, total offense, they averaged 403 yards per game last season. When you look at what they did, total offense, they led the conference with 389 yards per game and 5.6 yards per play. So the offense got even better. Um, there's no shortage of numbers to look at. Last season, they averaged 227 yards through the air. Um, this past season, when you look at their passing attack, their numbers were down this season at 189 yards, but they still completed 60% of their passes, which was tops in the league. And they threw for 27 touchdowns on the season to 10 interceptions. So still great numbers. Just the yardage was down because they ran the ball more and they picked up more yards on the ground. Last season they threw for um, last season they threw 21 touchdowns, so they threw more touchdowns this season than they did last season. The offensive line last season allowed 27 sacks. This season, they allowed 21, so they cut down the sacks allowed, and that all those things kind of contribute to making your offense be more efficient. Um, they were a really good third down team. They converted 41% on third downs, which was second in the league. They were second in the league in total first downs per game, at 20.2 last season. Um, Last season, they led the conference at 20.9 first downs per game. So not that big of a difference. Third down percentage, they were at 38%. So that went up. And, when you look at the way this offense was, they had a really solid passing attack. Like, it wasn't flashy. Morgan finished the season 163 of 256, 2,236 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. The guys that he really went to, um, were Isaiah Spencer, who had 35 catches for 660 yards and 4 touchdowns. He averaged 18.8 yards per catch. He had a long of 67, and Jonas Fortillion had 41 catches for 627 yards on the season. He averaged 15.2 yards per catch and 11 touchdowns. Also, Janaylin Dupree had 21 catches for 356 yards and 5 touchdowns. He averaged 16.9 yards per catch. Tyquan Henderson had 14 catches for 238 yards. He averaged 17 yards per catch and a touchdown. Marvin Landy at tight end had 17 catches for 235 yards and 3 touchdowns. Even at tight end, he averaged 13.8 yards per catch. They had a really downfield offense, because of their passing attack. Because they could run the ball and teams would come up, they weren't scared to go over the top, and they did that. And when you look at all the guys who basically caught 10 or more passes, 7 of those guys averaged more than 12 yards per catch. So all of those guys who caught balls, for the most part, were able to go downfield. The shortest reception out of that group, in terms of long, I'm trying to say how to say this without sounding funny. The shortest, longest reception of that group was 27 yards. You had a 42-yarder in there, you had a 46-yarder in there, you had a 66-yarder in there, you had a 70-yarder in there, you had a 67-yarder in there. So even a guy like Terrell, who had 15 catches for 95 yards, averaged 6.3 yards per carry, had a 20-yard reception. So, they really were able to strike downfield and hit those big plays when teams committed to stopping the run, even though they never really did. But teams had to account for that, and they were really good about going over the top and really making things happen on teams. But when you look at what this team did on the ground, tremendous numbers. 368 against Valley, 349 against Bethune, 283 against Alcorn, 275 against Southern in the championship game, 256 against TSU, 247 against Pine Bluff, 245 against FAMU, 201 against Southern the first time, 184 against Lane, 159 against Grambling, 152 against South Carolina State, 140 against Alabama A&M, 74 against Bama State, which is tremendous by that defense, at 59 against ULM. Um, this team had 8 games with more than 200 yards on the ground. That's just that's honestly totally. I mean, there's no other way. That's a ridiculous number. That's a team that can run on anybody other than Bama State, who had the top defense in the league in terms of rush defense, and an FBS opponent. Other than that, nobody held them under 140 yards. So they were able to get whatever they wanted on the ground. Um, Passing wise, they the numbers were kind of all over. 279 against Grambling, 250 against Lane, 233 against South Carolina State, 227 against ULM, 226 against Bama State, 211 against Alcorn, 198 against Southern the first game, 187 against Pine Bluff, 185 against TSU, 164 against Bethune, 155 against FAMU, 120 against Alabama State, and 110 against Southern in the championship game, 105 against Valley. Some of those games they ran for a ton of yards and didn't necessarily have to throw it. But this offense obviously was tops in the league, and you can see why. And there's no shortage of weapons for them, and they were able to really take care of business on all aspects. I said in my thoughts, who would be the guy, Morgan or McCoy, and Morgan, he took that job. McCoy had some flashes early, kind of went down to injury early in the season, but Morgan was the guy for the most part. Um, Offensive line was definitely a strength. You're looking at a line that was very solid. Like I said, they cut down their yards, they cut down their sacks, and they increased their rushing yardage, which is strictly physicality by the offensive line. I mean, the backs get a ton of credit for running the ball, but if your offensive line can't dominate a defensive line, you're not gonna run the ball the way that they do. And you could see games where they just kind of had their way with teams on the line, and that just makes it easy. And then when you got a guy like Irv Mulligan that can, bounce off of tacklers and break tackles and, get big yards like that, that helps a lot too. But the offense was really was I mean, offense was tremendous. Looking at the defense, to me, my question was linebacker. I thought the D line was solid. I thought the secondary would be pretty good, and they were solid all over that defense. Um, that defense really made a lot of problems for everybody. When you look at what they did this season, if it wasn't for Bama State, this defense would probably be the top defense in the conference. They allowed 17 points per game. When you look at what they did last year, they gave up 23 points per game, 23.9, almost 24. So they cut that number down by 6 points per game. Last season, they were fourth in total defense at 353 yards per game, 5.4 yards per play. This season, total defense, they gave up 273 yards per game and 4.5 yards per play. Huge drop for the defense. They gave up 28 total touchdowns this season on defense. Last season, they gave up 36. Rushing defense, last season, they were seventh at 148 yards per game. This season, when it comes to run defense, they were second in the league at 110 yards per game. 3.4 yards per carry and 14 touchdowns. Those were the second fewest touchdowns in the league. And all that is because you have solid guys on all three levels of your defense. Reed Pulliam was a guy who really stepped up at the linebacker position. A young guy, sophomore, had 65 tackles to lead the team, 7 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Ashton Taylor was another guy who came on strong, especially in the later portions of the season. He was a guy who could make some things happen and make some big plays here and there, and help out in the linebacker room. And when you look at this defense, they registered 104 tackles for loss. So that means your line is getting penetration. I mean, your linebackers are making good plays, and your secondary guys are coming down and making plays in the backfield as well. And that's just tremendous defense. This defense had 39 sacks this season. Again, just tremendous pursuit. Um, it's just second to Bama State, so it's the numbers were great there, and they were very good in the run game. The passing defense was still solid at 162 yards per game. If it wasn't for two teams allowing under 160 yards per game, they would have led the conference in passing defense. They had 15 interceptions, which was second in the league. They allowed 14 touchdowns, which tied for second in the league. Um, which was third in the league. They just, this defense was just tremendous. Last season, the defense wasn't bad, but they had a lot of pieces to add to that defense, and they had their ups and downs. Last season, they allowed 187 yards to that, which is still not bad. 16 touchdowns there, 17 interceptions last season. So those numbers are all comparable. And last season they registered 29 sacks. So they were a team who was very, very solid on both sides of the ball. And when you go 8-0 in conference, you have to be a really good team on both sides of the ball. I mean, you're going to have your ups and downs. And earlier in the season, I think JSU had an issue of closing the door on teams. They jumped out to a big lead on Southern. Southern made it respectable, still lost by double digits. They got a big lead against Bama and them. They cut it to 7 and held on and win. But from that point on, they slammed the door on teams when they got in the second half. 17-17 against Bethune, won 37-17. They just, they shut, they held FAMU down in the second half. They just, they slammed the door on Southern in the second half again in the championship game. They never let Alcorn get in the game. They just did not give up much in the second half after a certain portion of the season. And a lot of that is because the offense was able to really hit the throttle, and it was because the defense was able to stymie teams in the second half and just out physical teams and just make them have to work for everything they got in the second half of games. And that's also conditioning, which is a key testament to the coaching staff as a whole and the strength and conditioning program, and it's buy-in from the guys. They want to. They know what they have to do. They learned from early in the season. They learned that they can't turn the ball over and win. They learned they had to take care of the ball. They learned that they can't let teams get back in games. They had to slap teams in the face and slam the door on them, and that's what they did. And that's why this team finished the way they did. That's why they won the Celebration Bowl the way they did. They were just on a mission, and they just were able to take care of business in that way. And that makes it easy for you to win like that. I'm not saying winning is easy, but when you do the things that they do, you're really gonna be in a better position. Like I said, the defense had 15 interceptions, and they recovered 8 fumbles, so they had 23 takeaways. This season they threw 10 interceptions, and they lost 9 fumbles. So they were plus 4 in the turnover margin. Last season I think they were like +5, so not a big difference. And that's even still with a 5 turnover game. So they were +9 last season. This season they were +4, and the difference is that 5 turnover game early in the season. Special teams were tremendous. I said it would be solid, but special teams were tremendous. When you look at the kicking game, they were great there. And again, that's another aspect of a really good team. When you have a good kicking game on both in all phases, it makes things easier for you. They average 38 yards per kickoff return net, 57.8 total. They had 20 touchbacks, which was second in the league. They kicked 30 field goals. They were 22 of 30 for 73%. Again, very solid there. Basil was 22 of 30 on the season with a long of 48. 8 of 10 from 30 to 39 yards, 9 of 9 from 20 to 29 yards, 5 of 8 from 40 to 49 yards. He was 0 for 3 from 50 plus, but everything inside of 48 yards, really, really good. Did have one kick block, but very, very solid there. The punt game was great as well. They finished second in the league in punting average at 41.1 yards per punt. Only because Bethune-Cookman had a guy who was an absolute machine at punter. They averaged 38 yards per net return. Per net net punt. Um, they allowed 1.7 yards per punt return, which is a really solid return coverage. That was third in the league. Matt Noel was a very, very good punter for them. He finished the season averaging 42.5 yards per punt with a long of 66, had 17 punts inside the 20, 950 plus yard punts. Um, just great depth. But where this team really shined at was in the return game, and that was on the legs of Travis Terrell. He averaged 16.6 yards per punt return with a long of 44. He averaged 30.6 yards per return with a long of 96 and two touchdowns. That's an advantage that a team that's as good as they are doesn't really need. Those extra yards that you get off those returns, um, and the points that come off of them, those are all game changers. Um, and that also adjusts how teams have to approach you. If they had to kick away from you, maybe they kick the ball to bounds and just give you ball at 35, or try to kick the ball to the back of the end zone. They have to adjust their strategy for your guy, and when you have a guy like that, it makes things a lot better for you, and it makes things starting at the 35 or the 40 instead of the 25 is great for your offense. If you can start, if you don't have to worry about teams really moving the ball on your defense and they punt, and you can get the ball closer to midfield, makes it better for your offense. So a great return game and a great kicking unit, all of that adds with a great offense, a great defense, it equals a championship team. And there's no other way to really put it than that. The last thought I had, I said early season momentum, and the schedule, really shaped up for that. You had the ULM game, and other than that, every game they had on that schedule was winnable. And whatever happened at Grambling, it happened. Grambling is a strange place, especially for JSU at times. And it didn't fail here. Other than that game, it was pretty smooth sailing. They came off the ULM game, they jumped into the Lane game, blew them out. Came out against Southern, took care of business there. Dropped the Grambling game, but bounced back against Texas Southern. Alabama and them, they took care of business. FAMU was a huge game. They weathered that and won. And from then on, it was games that really all just fell into line, and it all started with a good start to your season. I mean, other than the Grambling game, you won every game that you had early in the season, and that changes the way you can approach things. And the fact that game wasn't a conference game kind of also gave you a little bit of a bump, because instead of starting the conference 0-1, 1-1, if the Southern game had counted, you still was 0-0 going in the TSU game, which means starting over fresh in conference, and you can build from there. And that's and that all that equals a championship. Um, is pretty cut and dry and simple for a team like this, and they accomplish every goal that you can set for a team. As a guy who sits behind a chair and talks, I said they're still at 11-1, and they could have got there. I said they floor at 7-5, and that was really if things just did not go right, maybe a lot of injuries or a couple of bad breaks here and there, but that obviously was not going to happen with this team. So they finished pretty much in the middle of where I thought they would, and this team is now the Celebration Bowl champ, the SWAC champ. They got a good chance of running it back. So when we talk about this team coming into next season, a lot of this is probably going to still be able to be fed into that preview. Um, Tremendous team, championship caliber team. Team took care of business. Coach Taylor deserved Coach of the Year. Not only it's only so much praise I can heap on a rival. You know what I'm saying? And so you give it. I'm giving them all their kudos because they earned them. And that pretty much does it for this one. Like I said, these are not as fun as the bad teams because it's all cut and dry. But with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC. See, well, signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.